All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you all for being here today. My name is Kelly Cooper, and I am the CEO and founder of the Center for Social Intelligence, and now also the author of Lead the Change, the Competitive Advantage of Gender Diversity and Inclusion. Before we jump into things here today about the book, I wanted to let you know about the 2 free giveaways I have going on today as part of our book launch. And they'll go to the 2 people who give me the best answer to the following question. What is the biggest challenge you face with taking action on GDI, on gender diversity and inclusion? For those of you who aren't involved in this line of work directly, but are just interested in the topic itself, perhaps you could answer this question. What is the biggest challenge you face when speaking with your peers, your colleagues, or family members about this topic? Okay, so park that away for now, and we'll get back to it at the end of the time here together, and you can enter your answer into the chat line where my colleague Joey will vet the answers, and we'll pick a random name from the list. All right, so moving into the book now, people have asked me what made me decide to write this book. And my answer to that is pretty simple. It's because I could see there was little practical or logical information out there about why we need to act on GDI. And I could see executives in particular spinning on understanding the value proposition, because that is how our capitalist society works. And without that clear explanation, we aren't going to see any engagement from them. And I saw targeting the executives because without their leadership and commitment to this issue, we won't get any traction. It's like any change initiative in an organization. The person at the top has to be signaling to all employees that this is a business imperative and that they are fully on board driving it through to fruition. And the second reason I wrote the book is because I could see people needed a roadmap on how to go about making a shift in their organization on GDI. So I figured it would be helpful to break it down in clear and simple plain language, just how to go about doing that. And showing it's not a black box of unknowns, that there is a path forward that can be sustainable and effective. This book is helpful not only to executives though, it's also helpful for change agents in an organization who are tasked with HR responsibilities, such as Tanya Wick, which is a perfect segue into introducing Tanya today. Tanya is the VP of People and Services at Tolko Industries. For those who don't know Tolko, it is a privately owned Canadian forest products company based in BC. When I first met Tanya, I was struck by all that she has done to raise GDI up the flagpole in her company. Being the only female VP, I knew she had strength of character and smarts to be making changes happen. I asked Tanya to participate in my steering committee on the Gender Equity in Canada's Forest Sector National Action Plan, and we've had a great working relationship ever since. I was very pleased when she agreed to participate in today's virtual book launch because I know she will add value to our discussion based on the experiences she has had to date in her organization. So Tanya, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you, Kelly, for that introduction. And I certainly will have many stories. As recently as yesterday, we still get stories on GDI. But really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to discuss your book, and I'll do a little bit discussion about it a bit further down today, but look forward to it, excited about it. And for our listening audience and our viewers, I'm not sure if they can see that great shirt that Kelly is wearing.
You see
great
it?
for golfing, great for hiking. I do, Kelly, thank you. Back to you.
Okay, so what we're going to do here today in our time together is that I will read a short excerpt from my book for about 5 minutes. And then Tanya will kick us off with some questions and lead us through questions from those of you on this webinar. And I decided to read from the beginning of the book because some of you who haven't picked up the book yet, I thought you might be interested in an overview of what the book's all about. I jumped to a couple of places within the value proposition section to keep things moving along here and not getting bogged down in the facts and references because those are all readily available in the book itself. Okay, so I'll start with the introduction section, and for those who have the book, if you want to read along, it's almost like a read along. Here we go. So page 25 is where I'm going to start. There is greater awareness now than ever before on gender imbalance in the workforce. Progressive leaders are looking to improve their reputations with all key stakeholders on gender diversity and inclusion and avoid being singled out for harassment issues. Society has elevated its social standard and is vocalizing the social imperative for gender equality across the work front and the home front. But what has been lacking is how to go about making that change happen. I've experienced working with leaders to implement gender diversity and inclusion strategies. More specifically, I help companies achieve success financially while improving workplace culture overall. By understanding their goals and ambitions for the company, whether the organization is local, regional, or international, we work collaboratively with leaders to create a return on their social investment. The purpose of this book is to engage leaders on compelling reasons why they should target gender equality as a business imperative and how to go about it efficiently. This book highlights several leading companies, including Sodexo, that has invested in GDI strategies and have seen amazing results. For every dollar put toward gender diversity and inclusion, they've seen a social return on the investment of $19. Readers will come away with a solid understanding of a path forward to shift the workplace culture toward this end. This book's intended to help any senior leader in any sector understand the impetus behind the cutting-edge issue of gender diversity and inclusion, and how by pursuing a culture shift in their organization, they will have a leg up on the competition in this ever-competing global market, both through financial returns and a more welcoming environment for all. I wrote it for any decision maker in any sector who is looking to learn the value proposition and how to be the change, make the change, and leverage the change into dollars. Okay, now I'm just going to move over to the value proposition section and start at the beginning of page 29. In keeping with the advice Wayne Gretzky's father gave him, decision makers know that it's critical to anticipate where the puck is going in order to get into position and score. Being able to see the next big thing is what can differentiate successful companies from the pack and propel them forward financially, while simultaneously motivating employees through a sense of pride in working there. Leadership comes from stepping up and out, often when others don't see the benefits yet, and bringing employees along to make fundamental change happen. And one of the issues that requires fundamental change is gender diversity and inclusion. Although there are some who still have their heads in the sand, those of us above ground are seeing the signs and messages all around, poking us and reminding us that change is coming regarding what our workforce needs to look like. Legislation on gender diversity and inclusion is popping up around the world, and the number of female university graduates, including the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, is increasing. Women are chomping at the bit to get working and take on a career path to the boardroom or into technical positions. Shareholders are now asking questions regarding how many women sit on boards, and they're asking companies to be transparent with their numbers on gender diversity. Goldman Sachs just came out with a headline stating that boards packed with bros don't get IPOs. These types of messages send a pretty clear signal that an all-male board no longer cuts it. And if you want to get capital, you must diversify your gender composition. These are solid indicators that change is afoot. In spite of these indicators, however, many decision makers are still asking what exactly the value proposition is. What is the business case? Or as I like to call it, the business advantage. Let me begin by answering this and lowering the fog index so that we can get past the questions about why we need to do this and get on with how to make it happen. So what is the business advantage? A pretty common question on the topic of gender diversity and inclusion is, why would we want to bother doing anything on this issue in the workplace when there's really no clear imperative to do so? Things are fine just the way they are. Here's what I say to that. We don't have the luxury of debating this conversation anymore. As I have shared, I started in the field of environmental science. I wasn't even dialed into the issue of gender diversity and inclusion back when I was just beginning my career. It wasn't until later, when I started having kids, that it became quite evident to me that there was an issue. That's a time when women are either supported to advance and continue with their careers or pulled off the rails. To be clear, gender diversity isn't just about supporting ambitious women. Rather, it goes beyond the personal career interests of individuals. We have to look more broadly and recognize that we need women for our economy to function at its best. I'll stop here and say that this chapter provides a lot of data from numerous sources to support the business case, so I won't get into all of the references here. But to summarize the key points, I'm going to go to the end of the chapter where I provide key takeaways for the reader to understand the main points, and I do that after every chapter, so it's very clear for you, the takeaway. One, the cost-benefit analysis of implementing a gender diversity and inclusion strategy shows greater returns than if nothing was in place. Two, the potential liability of an employee or peer who decides to engage in inappropriate behavior in the workplace can be extremely costly. Three, the economic benefits will pull you, and the legislation will push you toward action on gender diversity and inclusion. Four, turnover of employees will decrease for women and for men. And finally, gender equality will create increased profitability and productivity, an enhanced ability to attract and retain talent, greater creativity, innovation, and openness, an enhanced company reputation, and better ability to gauge consumer interest and demand. So that's the end of my reading for you guys today. I'm going to turn it over to Tanya now, and then she can provide some questions for us to get us started.
Definitely. So thank you, Kelly, for sharing this part of your book. For those of you listening, Kelly, as she mentioned, is a leader in this space. So when she asked me to participate, I was excited, and she soon became one of my favorite people to be working with. Being personally involved with Kelly on a national committee aimed at solving this issue for the industry that I work in has led me to really admire her work. The book says progressive leaders are looking to improve their reputation on GDI and that society has elevated its social standard. But what is lacking is how to go about making this change happen. And so for the listeners today, that's what Kelly's book is all about. And as she mentioned, we're going to get into FAQs in a moment. But when I read the book, I appreciated all aspects within it. And as an executive in an all-male dominated company and industry, I truly wished, and this is my biggest complaint, that Kelly didn't get on this book sooner. It certainly would have helped me on my GDI journey at my organization to move it faster than it did already. The guidance the book provides, it's clear and it's logical. And as I mentioned, it would have accelerated what I wanted to accomplish. So if leaders follow this process, they're going to see immediate improvement in their gender diversity and inclusion. But what I realized, and what Kelly talks about in her book as well, is that this brings a lot of resistance. So I want to jump into a few questions to start us off, and then we're going to encourage the listeners to certainly send in your questions in the chat as we go as well. Alrighty, Kelly, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Alrighty, first one. Why do you think leaders are still reluctant to take action on this issue, given everything that's in your book and all the research, and as you said, everything that's out there? What's holding them back?
I think there's many answers to that, actually. I think many people still find it unnecessary to do anything about this. So they haven't bought into the value proposition. They haven't bought into the business case. I think they don't have any idea about how to go about it. And so there's some fear, I guess, or of the unknown. They don't want to fail because of that unknown. I don't think they see the benefits that are there for men. And that's another thing that I get into in the book, is what are the benefits to men, because there are many benefits. And I also think, especially lately, there's a real saturation with experts in this topic. And so they don't really know where to go with confidence. They don't know who to trust. So it's a bit of a murky waters.
Great, thank you. And so there is so much to do, and there's so many things to accomplish. And so what I often hear is a leader saying, we don't know where to begin. What would you tell them to do to start taking action right now?
For leaders, I would say what would be really helpful is to seek out some gender expert that they know and interview them. Because everybody's different in their approach and in their personality, and every culture in an organization is also different. And so you want to have something that works for you. So that's really important. So, because at the end of the day, the executive team or the president needs to be owning this initiative. They need to take charge. They need to feel confident that the path they're choosing is going to be successful. So I would say they should be going about it with getting some advice in the short term, finding somebody they can trust, and start walking through that process.
Excellent, and thank you. And for the listeners, just so you know, at TOCO, we did the gender audit. It really helped us understand where we were going. and what we needed to fill in those gaps. But we didn't fill in all the gaps. As Kelly was saying, based on our culture and where we were going, we felt there was certain actions we wanted to leverage and do first, and some that we put on the back burner. The organization can only, I would say, take on so much change at once. So we really were careful on what activities we were doing in order to make sure they were anchored. We didn't want this just to be a poster on the wall. We really wanted to have it anchored.
Yeah, just one more thing I'd like to add to that, Tanya, if that's okay, is just to add that as part of that process of seeking out an expert, I strongly advise the person who's seeking it out to, like, hopefully the president, to be coached directly on how to be the change. And that's the big piece I speak about in my book. It's one of the chapters. And that's to help them understand the language they need to be thinking about using, the behaviors they need to start displaying. There's some coaching there that if they had right from the beginning, I think helped to set the tone for what they're undertaking. That would help.
Definitely. 100% agree to that, Kelly. So you mentioned that GDI needs to be supported from the top. All change initiatives do in organizations. So what would you tell those middle managers, those HR professionals, and we have some of those on the phone today, that are really struggling? We know they struggle to get their executives' attention on this issue.
Yeah, and that's a fair question for sure. I find that with the middle management, it's a really tough slog. They have ambition to do stuff, but they can't get the focus of the executive team on it. So I guess the thing I would say, and I tell everybody often, is you need to start gathering your own data within your company. You need to start figuring out what your situation is. You need to know the numbers. And part of that is building your business. That's part of building your business case. So you need to look at things like what number of women are at what level of the organization, who's being promoted more, who's getting stretch opportunities, who's getting training for career advancement. All of these are indicators to help build your business case, and that's really important. I would also say identify an ally that you could find within the executive team who can help champion you with this at that level. This helps to grease the wheels when you're putting the presentation forward, the business case forward, and has somebody in your corner. I would also say, as I said previously, but you need to have like a gender expert or coach so that you know you're fully prepared for your presentation with that business case to the executive team. Because when you have that, that will help you to ensure that you don't have any pushback. You'll have all your, as I say, all of your T's crossed and I's dotted to make sure that everything is kind of locked down, because usually you only get one shot at the net, and you want to make sure that you've got it all aligned. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, excellent advice on the numbers. The metrics for me and using those at the organization were really what was enabled me to stand in front of the board of directors, the shareholders, and our leadership team and show them the business case around there. We looked at everything from recruiting, as you were saying, development, even who was coming to training and who was sitting in those seats. And when there was training at sites or at the corporate office, where were they coming from and what roles were they filling? We looked at where we were hiring women in the pay range and what was the average increase per year for women versus men, and what was the average length of time in the position that they held and in their roles. So that was a very interesting metrics that we found that really pushed forward some of our programs. But as you mentioned, finding allies and men as well being those allies are really key. We put in a parental leave. We were finding that we had maternity top up for women. So it was really holding back that men could take time off as well to spend with their children. So we put a program in that supported men to take time off for childcare as well. So with all of that,
that's a great example. I just want to say one more thing, Tanya. That's a great example, because a lot of that gets back to the benefits for men. Like, we need to show that this isn't just a women's issue. As I say in the book, this is an everybody's issue. And once they start to, once you speak about this topic in that fashion, I find that there's greater receptivity of the whole issue.
Yeah, exactly. And tie it to your HR strategy. So this is my final question before we'll turn it over to our listeners. And it's all around numbers, so around dollars. We can't ignore that people think it's costly to spend money on GDI, and that they think getting that return on their investment will take too long. and to get a benefit from. And you also know that you're competing with priorities and organizations. Just in my department, there's a multitude of projects that need limited resources and limited dollars. And so having to pick and choose where to prioritize that. So what do you say to the folks that put that out there?
Well, I say that change of this nature, of any change, takes time. If you're putting in an IT strategy, there's a whole lot of appetite for people to understand that that's going to take time. Well, this is a similar thing. It's just on a more of a social issue, you could say, not an IT thing. But what you have to do is recognize that there are companies out there doing this and doing it successfully. So I would get stats on companies from others in your sector who are doing great things, and or sectors that are outside of yours that have successfully implemented the change and are showing not only benefits financially, but they're attracting the best and the brightest, and they're keeping them. And that's when you can start, I know I did this with our forestry project. We had a number of people that were just not buying into things. And I said, well, wait a minute, how do you explain these other companies, these international companies that are doing some amazing stuff in their social setting or social context, but are getting these amazing returns on their investment? You can't ignore these facts. And so just because it hasn't been as largely spoken about here in Canada, or that it hasn't been spoken much in the natural resource sectors, which we all know are particularly struggling with numbers of women, doesn't mean it can't happen. We just have to follow that lead. And now I'm asking for others to follow the lead and start doing it for their own organization.
Absolutely, and I hope the listeners can hear your passion in that, which makes us very excited that you're leading this National Committee for Industry. So thank you, Kelly, for that. And every time I listen to Kelly speak, I add a few more things to my toolkit based on our conversation, and so this has been excellent. So we have a couple questions, Kelly, from the audience. The first one is, what excites you the most about the changes companies have been making in GDI?
That's a good question. What excites me the most? I guess what I like to see is the embracing of women at the senior levels. I think for me, more women at the decision-making level is making an impact that has a ripple effect in our society. So to me, if you get women up in those levels in an organization, they're just thinking longer term, I think. And they're more risk, I don't want to say risk averse, I'm a risk taker, so I'm not immune to risk ways of being, but I think that generally they have a more thoughtful, reflective approach perhaps to business, and also see secondary and tertiary benefits that affect communities, families. It's just a different way of operating. So I think that's when I start seeing that and start seeing how people are thinking in a more fulsome way, I think, wow, that's making a big difference in our society.
Yeah, I agree. I think that having more at the senior levels is going to change the organizations a lot quicker than the way that's happening today. So the next question was about barriers, and one of our listeners wants to know, what are the barriers that women face in the workplace that senior executives need to address?
What are the barriers that women face in the workplace that senior executives need to address? Oh, there's tons. So I would say there's a lot of challenge with opportunities for upward mobility. I would say there's issues around sexual harassment. There's issues around PPE. A lot of women who are in the technical positions are inappropriately wearing clothing that is frankly a safety hazard, or they are not able to go to the washroom in a private place. So there's a number of those kinds of problems as well. So there are many issues that are at play that I think could be addressed with some better decision making.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is, right from the very tactical piece, and again, we had one site that didn't have a women's washroom, and to things like getting called out a bit because you took a cab instead of the train at midnight when you're in a big city, to all the way to making sure there's time for them to have mentors and access to the senior leadership team. So all good things. So the next question.
Sorry, the other thing I'm going to add to that, because it's easier when we start having a dialogue to think more answers. But even when you're in a meeting, for example, and it sounds kind of basic, but I heard about someone doing this. I thought this was excellent. They did a little knitting thing on the side. When one man was speaking, it was knitted in red, and then when the woman was speaking, they were knitting in green, and the end product was like a mostly red, knitting. And I thought, wow, that was quite an interesting visual on what goes on at a meeting, where women are often not given the same amount of airtime to express a point. And that needs to change. Like, we need to create that space. And I mean, Tanya, you've done a great job in the last week with Gender Equality Week with explaining the differences in things like assertiveness versus aggressiveness. And they're important distinguishing words and ways of being in a meeting that men and women are labeled with. And it's important that we, are aware of that. Like, the self-awareness piece is really important. And yeah, we should be making those little subtle moves as well. So that's where I get into the coaching, is like, there's a lot of things we could be pointing out or almost role playing at certain periods of a day of meetings or at the water cooler, like just how conduct is had that can shift things in the workplace culture to being more, acceptable, frankly, to women.
Yeah, and thank you for pointing out our initiative last week, and real big shout out to Ecom. There are competitors in the East, but it really, for me, demonstrates that this is something the industry needs to do together. So we put aside our competition and came together to do that. So really great participation, especially from their CEO and their Vice President of Human Resources out there as well. So Kelly, how long would you think an initiative like this would take?
Well, I mean, it depends on where the organization's at the beginning. So if you go to my website, you'll see there's a gender growth curve, I call it, and it shows the various levels that an organization's at. So if you've never really done anything at all, you're going to have a longer period of time to work through things. Each organization has this different context, but it can take some time. Like, it could take a year to have things fully manifest in identifying your champions within the organization, creating your strategy. And then shepherding that through the process within the organization, so that you're starting to see some effective results. It takes some time.
Yeah, and I would add, in our industry, that we didn't have the data. So the data that we talked about and Kelly mentions in our book, it took us about a year just to get the data. Our systems didn't track a lot of things that we needed, like how many women applied for jobs or how many women were promoted within a pay range or within other pay ranges. So it did take us about a year to get there. We also conducted engagement surveys, focus groups, and in-person one-on-one conversations to get a lot of data to know where we wanted to go, to see where we were at and to where we wanted to go. And we were in year 5, or going into year 5 of our journey, and we've seen great increases in our numbers, but we are revisiting some of the focus groups this fall to see where we still have some gaps, because we've already identified some. So Kelly, the other question we have up here is, can you talk about the importance of emotional and social intelligence?
Sure. So I talk about this in one of the chapters of my book, is a lot about applying EQ skills in the workplace. And there is more and more attention, I think, being paid on that skill set for leaders and within an organization overall. But I haven't really seen it as I've expressed it in my book, where you're basically looking at gender diversity and inclusion through an EQ lens. So things like assertiveness, which we've already gone over briefly with Tanya and how she's been doing things in the last week, in terms of some women being perceived as aggressive, but in fact are just being assertive. They're injecting their thoughts or voice, or saying, hey, I wasn't quite finished my thought there. And so anyway, there's many different things you can do. But there's other ones there that things like impulse control. So this gets really around the sexual harassment piece. And for many of the people on the call, I'm not sure how much you've experienced that kind of thing, but I have had quite a bit of that in my career. And, you know, you just sort of have to have some, again, self-awareness about behavior and boundaries that come into place about, hey, you know, and the way I've learned to deal with it is to use humor, is to set that boundary and say, hey, you know, you may have thought that my idle chit chat here on the side of this meeting meant something differently, but let me be clear, it didn't. And you just kind of make some kind of movement to move the conversation along. But having those EQ skills that allow you to basically save face in a relationship and let people move on gracefully kind of needs to happen. Now, some people need a stronger wake-up call, but it depends on the setting or the context. But I've had to deal with that in both ways, in terms of being abrupt as well as being kind of gracious about it. And those are, I feel, important in order to get your point across, but to move it forward. Like, that's changing the channel to me, is if you can have those difficult exchanges, but still walk away as colleagues or direct reports, and move on. And it's really important, I think, for learning those skills to manage those things.
Yeah, I was recently reading about the difference between intent and outcome, and certainly when it comes to diversity and inclusion, they always say it doesn't, your intent doesn't matter, it's the impact on someone else. But our role can be to accept that what they say about their intent. So their intent didn't mean to hurt us, and how can we move forward from a place of not blame but curiosity and help to educate them in their from sort of that higher road. So there's been a few more questions, Kelly. They're just sort of pouring in here. So some of the issues you mentioned seem to indicate there may be a better need for GD&I legislation. What are your thoughts about the evolving legislation in this post-pandemic era?
I think they're excellent to have greater legislation in this area. I think that's the future. It's happening in other countries, and it helps to give us, give industry a guidepost on what they can do. And I think that's what legislation generally does do. So I think it's important that we have more of it. And I think Women and Gender Equality, the Department of Women and Gender Equality, are working on that right now.
Great, excellent. So someone has read your book already, because they actually say on page 143 of your book, now you're gonna have to flip through it, Kelly, quickly.
Okay.
You mentioned the top actions to managing resistance. Can you speak to this, please?
What would you like to know exactly? Like, I write about you mean the top 10? The top 10?
Actions to managing resistance.
Yeah. Okay, so,
how to get resistors on board, I would probably say, right? I might be interpreting the question, but.
So I've actually written a plan to eliminate resistance, and it gets into a greater thinking behind what you have here in the book that you'll be able to access pretty soon. I've developed it for the forestry steering committee work that we're doing with the sector and the forest sector. And so I encourage you to look back either to the Free to Grow website that we're developing for the forest sector project, or through my website. But essentially, what I talk about is it's a three-pronged strategy, including leadership, HR, and communications, working coordinated together on how to affect change and how to eliminate resistance overall in the best way possible. So these tactics, I call them, are really where you can, I give you all the explanations here in the pages that follow. So I'm not going to go through them here because they're in the book, but there's a greater, like an overall strategy I would recommend you looking at that gives greater guidance, I guess, for what you might be looking for. Maybe you could give me more of the question, because I'm not following maybe what you want.
And nothing else is coming up right now, Kelly.
Okay.
I'm getting the trigger. I'm getting the trigger that it's our time. We're a little bit over the 30 minutes, but to wrap up today and do the giveaway. So at the beginning, Kelly asked a question and indicated for the first 2 folks to respond that we would do the giveaway, and we did have 2. The first one is from Jody. Hi, Jody. Hope you had a great last week. The biggest challenge, Jody stated, is moving companies past basic compliers in terms of growth. It seems most companies are stuck in denial, inaction. Also, GD&I efforts and discussions seem limited to the middle management or boardroom. So thank you for those comments. So that was in answer to Kelly's earlier question. And the other one is from Lewis. The answer to your question, leadership and cultural barriers. So I want to thank Kelly today for including me, and in closing, address a little bit to it. The 2 individuals had shared, because really encourage you to share your book with the key decision makers in your company. And it may not result in immediate change. It took, as I said, a while for us to get there, but it starts the discussion, and it's one discussion at a time, and you have to start somewhere. So get to the discussion, start doing that first step, and you'll start going in the right direction. With that, Kelly, I will turn it back to you for closing.
Yeah, that's excellent, and I appreciate that that experience being shared. So I would just say to folks that, just so you know, the book is now at chapters.ca. It's in print, it's an e-version. Also, it's in Audible format. So if you're looking for a gift for somebody, or if I've had people now approaching me about having it as part of their book clubs. For example, in the mining sector, they're doing diversity and inclusion book clubs, and they're wanting me to come and speak to the book, and they're going to read it first. And so there's many ways. I see the book being quite useful and effective with executive teams as a way to start educating them and bringing them along. So I encourage you to look for it. It's also on Amazon and, of course, my website. And thank you for your time today. I've appreciated your interest, and go forth and lead the change.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Kelly. Have a great, safe week.